So I'm actually, maybe I should have put the order of these Mar Mekaymas slightly differently. If you flip back, you'll see there's from Rabbi Genek's Sefer of Rabbi Yissachar on Avelus and Tisha B'Av. So there's a little shtickle from the Fetter of Moshe. Now I can say the uncle of Moshe after that background that we just gave a few minutes ago. So, because of Shulchan Aruch, yesh nagim shalei lirchayitz mirish chaydish v'yesh she'ein nimden el b'shabbezu. Just in Shua Shechabah, the actual week of Tisha B'Av. Some years it ends up more time, less time. So this year would be almost a full week anyway. Ubir b'zeh hagram, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik Zal, dehine kosev haramah. Shemedina ein le'esor rechitza be'eva al teich shiva bilvad. Now, when we talk about regular avelos, right? So you only ask the rechitza during shiva. Not during the whole month, right? We don't tell somebody who's in avails for a whole month not to. But the minhag became not what we do nowadays. Once upon a time, the minhag became that for the whole shleishim they didn't bathe. Right, back to the famous shtickle from Rav Moshe Soloveitchik of Avelos Chadash, Avelos Yishana. I assume that probably everybody here is familiar with it, so I didn't print that out. But that it's the converse order of regular Avelos because we're building up to the epitome of the Avelos on Tisha B'Av. And so therefore, the Tkufa of the 9 days mirrors the Tkufa of Shloshim in that whole Cheshbon. That the only time they were monea from rechitza, actually, in Igris Moshe's brother Moshe was maybe even mekel for lahavir tazuama during Shiva. It's a tshuva towards the end, but what do you call it? Mordechai Tenla says edus on it that I think that even his grandfather did himself, even lahavir tazuma, which is a little bit hard to understand because Moshe was made on himself that he changed his shirt not because he sweat, but because it's derech b'nei adam to change his shirt every day. So, anyway, but regardless, that's the most that we're talking about then anyway would be during the shleishim, during the shiva, and the shiva isn't mirrored by the 9 days. That you can shower off between Rosh Chodesh and the 9 days. So now I'm actually going to attempt until Tisha B'Av. Right? So during the 9 days you can shower, and until Tisha B'Av, maybe Erev Tisha B'Av after Chatzos, you can be mefakpik on, right? Maybe that's what he means really, because in theory the Anhagos, some of them start already from Erev Tisha B'Av, like we don't learn. Maybe that he would be masking to, but again, that's all in the realm of hypotheses. I want to. Actually, I'm going to make a steer minei ubei from Rav Moshe Soloveitchik in his svara a little bit, but in order to do so, I wanted to explore two other sugyas. What? It's from Rabbi Genek's Shiurei Harav on Hilchos Avelos and Tisha B'Av. That's in the second chelek of the Sefer on Tisha B'Av. It's Daf Chaf Aleph, the Siman Yud Aleph. Okay, so in the Mishnah in Maseches Sukkah.
So that's the first page.
Yeah, it tells us as follows. Rishayna hayalul nitol v'mikdash shiva v'medina yom echad mishchar beis hamikdash hiskin Rabbi Yechon and Zakkai sheyei lulav nitol v'medina shiva zeichel mikdash shey yom hanav kulei aser. Okay, so just to paraphrase that, it used to be in the mikdash they took the lulav and asik for 7 days. In the rest of the world, just 1 day after the bechor and beis hamikdash. So Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai was masaking that you take it all over the world for 7 days, Zeicher l'mikdash. And then there's an added din, which it's tangential to this chabura, but I'm actually going to talk about it for a second because it's something which I think is a phenomenal yesod as well. But that the day of the Hanof, when they would bring the carbon to be matir chadash on Pesach, that entire day would remain aser from eating chadash, even though we'll see the Gemara about it, but even though when you don't bring the carbon, the day itself is really matir, they asked the whole entire day, and we're going to see exactly why when we get to the Gemara. Zak the Gemara says, Minol and Davdin and Zeichel HaMikdash. How do we know that we make Zeichel HaMikdash? The Amar Rabbi Yechanan, so Rabbi Yechanan tells us, the Amar Kra, because it says in the Pasuk, in Yirmiyahu, Ki ela arucha lach u'mimachtoisecha erpo'echa nu'um Hashem ki nidche karu lach tziyoni dairish ein la. So that's the end of the pasuk. Dairish ein la. The pasuk tells that there's nobody that's dairish tziyon miklal the boy drisha. So we see from that it requires a drisha. Therefore, we make a zecher lechorban. Now, the Gemara, this is the tangential point, so let's put it into parentheses, so to speak, but let's continue to read. The Gemara asks on the Yom Hanav Kulei, Aser, my time, and why? Mehera Yibana Beis HaMikdash, Be'ez Hashem Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt in the very near future. V'yayimru, and they're going to tell us, Ishtakid Milo Yachlanu Ba'ir Mizrach, last year we ate the second day of Pesach, we ate immediately in the morning, Chadash. Hashtanami nechol ve'inu lo yada d'ishtakad lo have. First day of Pesach. Ve'inu lo yada d'ishtakad lo have a Beis HaMikdash her mizrach hitir. That once the sun rose, it was matir us to eat the chadash. Hashtanami Beis HaMikdash. Omer matir the korban. Omer's matir the ivnei emas. So now the Gemara goes into a discussion when it was rebuilt. So it has to be that it was rebuilt mamish just then. So they had that day they could have still brought it. You know, it's that first day of Pesach, they could still bring it, but they didn't. So until they bring it, because they're first building the Beis HaMikdash, like we know, the Medrash says it's going to fall out from Shemayim, etc. Exactly what ends up happening or not, because other Midrashim seem to say that we are physically going to rebuild it, whatever that means exactly, but it might, B'ez Hashem, that building of the Beis HaMikdash should go very quick. Right, there's all the mechonot that have already created, that have already decided exactly how we can and do all the things. So hopefully that will save us some time. Also, who knows? Anyway, so why is this tangential point very, very important? There's a question when we address mitzvos hatluyos ba'aretz that Margila Bepuma of the Chazon Ish very often will write in reference to one of the mitzvos hatluyos ba'aretz in terms of a suffix. He'll very often reference it that say that it's me'ein do'oraisa. Mitzat sheni, sometimes he's mitzaref the fact that bisman hazeh it's only d'Rabbanan l'kula. Right. So is it me'ein do'oraisa and we view it therefore as a do'oraisa, or is it as a kula? So without getting into taisus, that might be a chabura for a different time. Without getting into taisus about what type the categories of me'ein do'oraisa, but I think that essentially the mitzvos that are pertinent to mitzvah tluyos ba'aretz and to the Beis HaMikdash, to the karbanos, zroim and kodshim, are a slightly different category, which is that it's be'etzem a chinuch. We're doing it now because meher yibana Beis HaMikdash. We're concerned with what's going to be. It's me'ein do'oraisa. Why? Because what you're doing today as a d'Rabbanan, tomorrow is going to be a do'oraisa. So similarly to the way we approach chinuch, that you can't give your kids, right, the famous Mishnah Berurah, you can't give your kids a pasal, a lulav, and esrog for the chinuch, because that's not chinuch. Chinuch is to take a kosher lulav and esrog. Right? So too, when we do the mitzvahs hatluyos ba'aretz, or things that resemble kravas carbon in some way, or that have to do with kravas carbonos, with the avodas hakadshim, it has to be done in a way which is technically kosher, because we can't train you to do it now in a way which tomorrow is going to be a problem, and that's evident from this Gemara. And that's the reason for discrepancy. So sometimes la'achar ha'maisa, when we address it, at the end of the day, the psul in it is a psul d'Rabbanan. But in the approach to it, the approach has to be an approach of a doraisa, because we're doing it in essence because Be'ez Hashem, hopefully in the very, very near future, it will be a doraisa, and therefore we have to approach it in that manner. Rav Asher Weiss actually blibes Tarachiyon on like these differences in the Chazon Ish, and I told it to him, and he was masking to this. So just having it there, I think it's more pshutim. That's the pshat. Now let's go back to
the others wrong. Why is there Rabbanan there? I mean, they're
also Chalas Eretz Yisrael. Chalas Eretz Yisrael. We approach Chalas Eretz Yisrael as a deraisa as opposed to Chalas Chutz La'aretz, because Chalas Chutz La'aretz was always only a derabanan. Whereas Chalas Eretz Yisrael, what's the difference? In Eretz Yisrael, it's also derabanan bisman hazeh.
Where's the Chazon mentioned derabanan? It's like derabanan legamin.
He says in many places. I didn't want to get into this because
it's all like
no. It's la'achar ha'maisa. The Chazon Ish is only mitzdaref it in all the scenarios where I see the Chazon Ish being mitzdaref it. It's la'achar ha'maisa.
Like surah.
So therefore, it's iser. The iser in it is only an iser derabanan. If I did something wrong, the psul in it is only psul derabanan. So klape at zero for another iser derabanan or another shayla, I might be making on it la'maisa after la'achar ha'maisa. But milechatchila, the way you approach it. In other words, the systems that you set up to deal with it, right. How you deal with it, that approach, you want to use an approach as if it's a doraisa because it's a chinuch for a doraisa. Okay. this Gemara is very clutch for that shtickle Torah. It's very important for that. Fine. The Gemara in, it's an Amud Beis, so it's Samech Amud Beis in Baba Basra and Cheskes Habatim, also a quite well-known Gemara. Maybe some people will learn it on Tisha B'Av. Hopefully this year we'll be able to learn happier things on Tisha B'Av. And yeah. So we have like this. The Gemara, after the two dots, a few lines above the Y lines. So the Gemara starts to discuss what happens nowadays, halachos, which if you look at the last page, I don't know that we really need to see it, and it's very, very small. So for those of you who might need reading glasses, or didn't think you needed reading glasses until now, you'll see that there's a Shulchan Aruch with the Mishnah Brura, and you see halacha l'maisa, all the nafkaminas about this. But Tisha B'Av doesn't, the day Tisha B'Av's over, what was customary in the mountains, and even here in Eretz Yisrael, it's Yom HaNsiyaswai, shortly after, and sometime between after Tisha B'Av and Tu B'Av, which unfortunately this year I don't think we'll have a real live Yom HaNsiyaswai.
You won't have singing by the base of Eidos this Tisha B'Av.
Well, we might.
Huh?
We might.
I didn't see his white color.
Oh. So, why? They can still come, they can still make it. There's a lot of airplanes that are mushbat. Maybe that's the reason why. They need all these airplanes to be mushbat to bring back all the Jews that one of the best shtick of terror for Rabbi Kahana is in the Shiva de Nechemta. Mi ka'av tu fena v'chayonim la'arbutehem. He has this whole shtick of terror that there's two different coming back. That it's coming back to Eretz Yisrael like a yaino that flies back to its home. And I don't know. I saw it from Rav Kahana. I didn't see it from Rav Kook, but
which Rav Kahana?
Rav Nachman Kahana, or Rabbi Kahana. I know he doesn't come around much anymore, but even before the Corona.
I see him all the time. He lives in my neighborhood.
That's Rav Kook. Rav Meir Lau quotes it all the time.
Okay.
From Rav Kook.
So Hitchakamti, and he says that the other ones are like the clouds. The clouds are pushed back by the wind. Right. So that Rabbi Kahana, though, just to let you know, I always tell people he's my Rebbe in Ben Adam Chavera.
A lot of people's Rebbe.
He's and I call him up when I have a Ben Adam Chavera issue very often, and it's unbelievable both his compassion and his understanding of the of human relations.
On many levels,
Fine. Anyway, so back to this Gemara. So the Gemara tells us that ein misaydin ve'ein Mechiyarin ve'en mefaychen bezman hazel. Lakachater mesuyedes mechuyeres mefayeches harizu b'cheskasa. Nafla enei chayzer ubayna aisa isura. Right. So it talks about. So it's because the Gemara is talking about rebuilding things, etc. But now the Gemara gets into a whole discussion that bezman hazel. Tanabanon lo yisad adam es beisay besid ve'im irei ba'ychayil aytaven mutter. Right, that you shouldn't. That nowadays we don't make our houses. This is a halacha that not everybody knows about in Chutzlar. It's also you shouldn't build a stone and concrete edifice, except for shuls. Yeah, except for shuls, because shuls the Medrash tells us will come back. Ceiling Gal, like great Meiser that when I learned in South Fallsburg. I don't know if any of you saw the buildings in South Fallsburg. So I started learning them what was called the old building, which looks like the pictures of the Lashon. It was this old, dilapidated wood building. The floor is saying kid in various places. The walls were saying and it was really falling apart. And when I was there, they built the new building, and then they made the Chanukah Sabayis. So Rebellious Svei, the Rosh Yeshiva of Philadelphia, came to the Chanukah Sabayis. He was afraid to go into the old building to daven mincha even. But when he spoke by the Sof Chayav, he started talking a lot about a lot of things changed. He was becoming more critical of some people who thought differently than him, and he also started talking a lot about the Geula Asida. So he spoke by the Chanukah Sabayis in the new base medrash. They davened mincha in the new base medrash l'chavaydei. And then he spoke in the new base medrash. He said, "You know why they had to rebuild the new base medrash?" This is the medrash says the Gemara says right that Bati Midrash and Bati Chinasiyah Shevavala Sidon Ligail. So he said the old base medrash wouldn't have made it. So they had to. So new base medrash is actually built out of brick. I mean, at least has a facade of brick. And that was the story there. So now the Gemara goes into a whole slew of things that we don't do. So Tisha B'Av, while we might have a concert soon afterwards, it doesn't fall behind us. It doesn't become just forgotten. There's halachos of Tisha B'Av, and the reason why I printed out the Shulchan Aruch is that to see that the halachos of Zeicha L'Chorban are printed at the end of Hilchos Tisha B'Av. Why? I think it's also very crucial to the Shtikul Torah for Ramesha of Avelos Chadash and Avelos Yishana, that you see that the whole idea is that the Avelos doesn't go anywhere. The Avelos stays with us. However, the Gemara tells us, if we scoot down a little bit more towards the bottom, I should have highlighted this before.
How far down you want to
Let me
Celsius
Rabbi Shmuel ben Tanya. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the bottom. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, Yom Shchar Beis Hamikdash, Dinu shenigzar al atzmenu shaloi lechol basar v'loi l'shos yain elo ein geyser in gezer al tzibur al amkin reva tzibur yichayim la'amim ba. The Gemara already said before that they actually acted this way until.
This is Rabbi Shmuel that went into the Kodesh Kodesh.
Right. So it says that before. It said that until Rabbi Yeshua came and asked them why they're being monea from themselves everything, that because they were actually monea from themselves everything. They didn't eat basa, they didn't eat yain.
Right.
So he says, so what are you going to live on? You shouldn't eat bread. So he said because there's no karbanos anymore. There's no basa from the karbanos. So how can we eat karban? How can we eat basa? How can we eat basa taiva? There's no yain for the nesachim. How can we drink yain? So he says, so then how are you going to eat lechem? There's no menachos anymore. So he said, okay, so maybe you're right, maybe we should eat pears. He says, but there's no bikurim anymore. So he says, okay, so we can eat other bikurim. So he says, but what about water? There's no niso chamayim anymore. So basically he told us we can't just go on without any end, and therefore it has to revert. But what is left is the increasing avelos up to Tisha B'Av, and then certain things throughout the year that we don't finish a house like we saw, that you leave, that amal is the way halacha l'maisa we paskin. You leave an al-amal that's not misuyad. I'll tell you a great story that I had in my house when I redid my house here in Yerushalayim. So the Arab workers wanted to know why I was leaving this amal. They started painting it. I made them take it off. I said, no, we made that mark on the wall. I used my amma actually to make the marking on the wall. I said, we made that marking on the wall because we said we're not putting plaster, we're not putting paint, we're not doing anything over here. So he said, why not? Right across the entrance from your house, you're doing something so ugly. So I said, it's exactly the idea. So they couldn't understand why. So I was thinking, I don't want to get into a fight with them right now about their whatever they call it, being where our Beis Hamikdash is supposed to be. So I told them, I said, we mourn for the fact that there isn't world peace. And we're awaiting the day that there will be world peace and that it will be symbolized by one house of worship for the entire world. And until that day comes and that house is built, we mourn for the lack of world peace and a coalition in service of God. And they were all impressed. They started telling each other, "Wow, did you hear that?" They were all impressed with it. Anyway, but Davar Pasha, that's what it is, right? Anyway, right. So anyway, I wasn't making anything up.
Right,
there's a difference between saying something carefully, there's a difference between choosing your words. There's a difference between choosing your words and making something up.
You could be Miss Universe now.
Anyway, so back to the Gemara, and we see that essentially the whole pshat is that we go back during the 9 days. We go back to that epitome of avelos that really they wanted to have all the time, but we said we can't do that all the time.
Right.
Therefore, we only do that for this tkufa of 9 days or shur shechabo.
With music also,
Right, music I didn't get into because that's a different. Maybe we'll give a chabura on Klei a different time. Right, but music. It's not just Rishonim. The Gemara says that it's aser. There are Rishonim that the Ramah matters it shaloi bekvios, but it's also not bekvios.
No, and ragil. In ragil mutar. It's ragil like melech, like the Ramah says.
Yeah, but no, it's very particular instances that the Ramah is matter. It's not across the board.
Right. The
Pashto says is that music is, and Rav Moshe is very machmir on his chuvas.
So there's in Yerushalayim, the weddings, right? That we have one.
We had stories about that also, which again, when we get to Chabur on that topic, we can discuss some of those. We can use real jurisprudence for that, for those sugyas. Anyway, back to the inyan at hand. Margul of the Puma, Rabbi Belsky would always say, when it came to the 9 days, and it came to Tisha B'Av the 3 weeks, etc., when it came to the Tkufa Bein HaMetzarim and the Avelos and the Beis HaMikdash, he would often use the words Kedaihu Beis Chayenu. When there was a shaila about Kula and Chumrah in the Avelos of the 9 days, he would always say Kedaihu Beis Chayenu. When he was asked about putting on clothing before, etc., so he felt that they should be put on, they shouldn't be put on two at the same time. Only one should be worn at a time, and it should be worn for at least, I think he felt at least a half hour. Each beged, he felt that's the Hagdar of the Shah. What?
The hardest thing to do.
Yeah, which also, what used to bother me about the idea of putting on begadim beforehand is that it's like, it's creating a way around the Avelos. But I think that when you understand, again, that idea of Avelos Chadash and Avelos Yishana, which I think is apparent through the Sugya, you appreciate it differently. Yeah, in a Hanami, we're planning towards it because we can't live with it all the time. So therefore, we do circumvent some of the issues because that's the whole reason why we don't live with it on a daily basis.
I think it's circumvention. I think it's an attempt to make it more relevant.
Right.
And more palpable during this.
Right. No. And there's preparation leading up to it. I think it's 100%. With that all being said, b'mechilos kvay the fetter, I think that there is a slight discrepancy between Avelos Chadash and Avelos Yishan to borrow their own phraseology, their own sprach, as it says in Yeshiva, right? To borrow that same safa, that in Avelos Chadasha, so we have an issue that it's only there. To the contrary, the Gemara tells us in a few places, right? We see in the Sugis and Ksubas, we see in the Ksuba and Brachos by Tovas Svinasa, that by Tirda, that there's no mitzvah of Avelos Be'etzim, the pain and the tsar, the suffering in Avelos. There's no mitzvah to suffer when somebody loses Lo Aleinu, a parent or a sibling or any other Sheva, one of the Sheva Krivim. There isn't Be'etzim a mitzvah to be misabel on them, to cry, etc. Rather what? The Medrash tells us in the end of Parashas Vayechi, at the beginning of Parashas Vayechi, the Medrash tells us that it's a natural formula, Medrash Rabbah, that it's a natural formula, that people have issues to deal with. Chazal then come and give us, and it's apparent through Rashi in various places throughout Shas, that Chazal are giving us the vehicle to deal with our Avelos. And therefore, we have a klal in Hilchos Avelos, which the Shulchan Aruch itself brings, that halacha kedivrei hamekel when we deal with Avelos Chadasha. Avelos Yishana, though, is an entirely different concept. It's Tzioni Darish Ein La. Drisha has to be created to the extent that we even create mitzvos to have that. But definitely in the Avelos itself, the Avelos was there in its entirety always. Rather what? Chazal peeled it away and only gave it back to us in an ascending form during the tkufa of the Bein HaMetzarim, and only left us with very basic ideas, not to be Sada Bayis Besid, not to finish a house completely, not to build a stone house, etc. Those are all Yisaitis that we have in the entire year, so as not to forget about it, but we increase that in increasing order throughout the tkufa of Bein HaMetzarim through 3 weeks, 9 days, Shua Shechaboy and Tisha B'Av itself. So that the idea is that over here it's Kedayu Beis Chayenu. We're not looking for those kulas. So by Shloishim, so it's true, the minhag nowadays, there was a minhag at one point to be machmir, not to shower, and perhaps that's where the original makar of the minhag not to shower during the 9 days stems from, perhaps. But nonetheless, the fact that we reverted during Shloshim, because there's all sorts of stadim lahakel, and the halacha is by Avelos Chadasha Kedivrei HaMekel. That's the converse, it's the exact opposite of this Avelos, of Avelos Yishana, which is to increase the mourning, that feeling of being misabel, of lack for the Beis HaMikdash. And right. We should have felt all year, Chazal removed from us from the entire year, and now they're putting it back in increasing order. Therefore, now the mindset shouldn't be to find ways to wiggle out to find Kedivrei HaMekel, Elo, it should be Kedivrei HaMachmir. And therefore, when it comes to showering, now I'm not getting into all the particular scenarios that we live in the Middle East where it's very hot and you're just walking outside sometimes, and I'm not talking about cold showers, hot showers. They didn't get into all the halachic ramifications, what should be done. But in essence, in other words, that this wide wholesale approach to some of these to Inyane Avelos during the 9 days should never be taken, because it's the converse of what's intended during the 9 days, and now the whole idea is Kedaihu Beis Chayenu.
Can I give you an odd down the Messiah? First of all, you should know that. The Iranian is saying there's a Ramah.